Good morning. Today's scripture reading is 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 9. I'll give you a moment. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them into the pits of darkness, held for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but protected Noah, a preacher of the righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. And if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, having made them an example of what is coming for the ungodly, and if he rescued righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the perverted conduct of unscrupulous people, for by what he saw and heard that righteous man will be living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from a trial and keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment.
In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to go into the chapter 19 of the book of Genesis. And as we turn there, we know this is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And as I said, this is not something we usually do with children. Let's talk about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and how God judged these two cities. And yet there really is. There's so much here. We're going to look at a bunch of different aspects of this. We're going to look, of course, of God's judgment upon mankind, which is everyone's favorite subject today. Right? People love to come to church and hear about judgment. But it does highlight a change in society and culture. In not just in our own generations, but from previous generations. If you read ancient literature, religious literature, going back well before the medieval time, but even into the Renaissance and different people groups, a lot of people had an expectation of judgment and a fear of judgment. It was built into their manner of thinking. If I do not do what is right, then I will have to answer to the king or to the magistrate or whoever it is. And so people lived with a fearful relation to how they dealt with authority. And this would sometimes translate into how they also interacted with God. And now not all of that is right, because we do see God's great mercy of sending Jesus Christ to restore us to himself. And he uses words that are too lofty for us to call us friends and children. But we often overcorrect. And we start to think of God as our buddy and not as the immortal sovereign of all creation, to whom we must give an account. And we see that in society today, that there is a lot of people feel indignant when you talk about judgment, as if there is no authority, and will shake their fist at God and like, how dare you, with just that sort of cultural arrogance, and not just our own culture, but so many worldwide at this present day and this present time. There were a people who will self-congratulate ourselves. We have an inflated sense of our own goodness, and that's coupled with a willful blindness to our own sin. And when we come to portions like this in Scripture, we need to make sure we have the whole picture of the gospel. Yes, God is love, and God is merciful, and he sent his son Jesus Christ, but he is also holy and just. And for those who reject his mercy, only a fearful sense of judgment remains, because he will judge the wicked, because wickedness should be judged. And so the awesome and mighty King is the holy judge. He will rule in righteousness, and he will rule according to his love. But like I said, there is also judgment, and we get to choose. We get to choose how we will receive, or how we will experience that meeting with God. So it's in our own decision making, right? Do we want to meet him as the loving father who welcomes his children home, or do we want to meet him as the judge who is bringing justice upon all wickedness? And today, as we look here in the book of Genesis, this is more than a morality tale. This is a divine visitation in human history, and there's a lot that we can learn from. So we're going to look at these themes of judgment. We're also going to look at the person of Lot specifically, because there's so much that we can learn from Lot. He's got actually some really good points of who he is, and he's got some other points you're like, these are really bad points. He's like a warning sign to the rest of us. And then we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of archaeology because I love this stuff. I just love confirmations on the Bible. So we'll jump in here. The stuff that we look on with archaeology, please take in mind, it always has to match the biblical text. Whenever we say a certain site may be a site, whether it is or not or isn't the biggest part of the sermon. All I want to do is to show you that the facts on the ground line up in a manner that is consistent with what you see in the Bible. I said last week there's a couple proposed sites for Sodom. One is Baba Drah. That's the kind of historical one. The newer one is this Tel El Hammam, which is the one that I kind of lean is the right place. Both of them have their critics because biblical chronology timelines are hotly debated in those circles. And so they say, well, the one is too early and the other's too late. But no one, I don't want to say nobody, but when these things actually happen is still not established. And the person who is doing the digs at Tel El Hammam says, no, this actually does match with the same time period of Abraham. So as we look about that, you look at this big pile of dirt and you say, so could that be Sodom? Or what we would say, what is left of Sodom? What do we know about this place? This was it's north of the Dead Sea today, just barely north. It used to be a lush plain. You look at it today and you're like, doesn't look so special, and it's really, really hot in the summer. But at one time, this was a very settled region of the world. It was known to be settled from antiquity, and in the middle of it, this was the largest city of the time. And I would suggest that it coincides with Abraham, even though there are others who would disagree. At the time of its height, before its destruction, it was 10 times the size of the city of Jerusalem in its contemporary setting. It was the largest city in the Jordan Valley. It was a notable place. And yet, after this cataclysmic event, in which habitation ended almost immediately, people did not return to the region for 600 to 700 years. The ground itself was poisoned, whether that's with the waters from the Dead Sea or some sort of salt or something that got in the soils. It took 600 to 700 years before people resettled it. So obviously something very horrible happened in the Dead Sea region. And this place, it had been continuously inhabited. The civilization suddenly collapsed without explanation. I'm going to tell you there's a pretty good explanation in Scripture. So we'll look at that. In chapter 19, in the book of Genesis, we read, and this, by the way, would be a contemporary reimagining of what that would have looked like. We're not just a dusty hill today, by one of the archaeologists from the dig. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them. He bowed himself with his face to the ground, and he said, "Hear now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet, that you may rise early and go on your way." And they said, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So Lot is sitting at the gate. He now lives inside the city of Sodom. It is a large cosmopolitan area, and for him to be sitting there, it tells us a lot about his status in the city. It was a custom of the elders to sit at the city gate. So it's possible that he was one of the elders at this point in the city, one of the men of reputation. And whatever is the case, it is obvious he has become a man of some distinguishment within that location. Now, as these two men come in, we know them to be angels from the previous chapter coming down to visit Sodom. He apparently does not know this yet, although he may have some inclination that these are important people. But whether or not he knows of their divine origin is uncertain. But we do see that he's hospitable. He sees strangers coming in, and he is living according to cultural norms, and he invites them in to care for them. It would have been okay for them to sleep in the city gate in the open square. But Lot is also aware where he lives, and he knows this is not a safe place. I remember on one occasion, late at night with my car going to a place, and someone telling me like, this isn't a good neighborhood for you. You should probably leave. And he goes, out of kindness. You could tell the person's looking around saying, this is unsafe this time of night, and I can tell you're not from here. You know, in full disclosure, that was outside the Rose Garden late at night. My keys were locked in my car. It was wonderful. But obviously I lived to tell the story. And so Lot knows where he is, and he knows this is not a safe place for these people coming in. So he brings them in, and he cares for them. Now, we do see as he brings them in, things are going to go south really, really quickly. Because it says, before they lay down, the men of the city of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. And they called out to Lot and they said, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out that we may know them carnally. This is obviously, this whole tale has just these parts that you go, this is going to have a little bit of a PG-13 rating when you read these passages of Scripture. The men here want to violently lay hold of these visitors for their sexual pleasure. So clearly they were not safe in the town square. And clearly what they want to do should not be done. And Lot is going to now trying to protect his guests. This is not individually the reason for Sodom's judgment. Rather, it is emblematic of the immorality, the violence, and the hard-heartedness that has come to characterize the inhabitants of this city. If they were looking for confirmation that Sodom is indeed a wicked place, they only needed to stay one night. And sexual immorality is one of the problems. We're not going to minimize what's happening here on that aspect. And any time in terms of our own sexuality, I know this is not popular in today's culture, but any time that we act outside of God's design, which is one man and one woman in a covenant relationship with each other for life, anytime that we violate that we are outside of God's holy commands. And as we do that, when we step outside of that, we invite so much heartache and brokenness and ever-expanding debaucheries, because we're never content to stop just barely outside the lines, into our own lives and into our own cultures. And apart from the fact that those who do such things, Scripture says, are worthy of judgment, we don't even take into consideration the damage that we do to ourselves and to our families and to our just generationally into our cultures. God's commandments are not meant to be cumbersome. They're meant to give life. But we also see it's not only sexually sinful gratification here, but the violence upon these visitors. As if one category of sin wasn't enough, we now had to add a second. And they view these outsiders as prey for them to devour. I mean, often this is a case with the tribalism that's common to human communities. You know, we can be good neighbors to people that we consider part of our people. And you see this in many tribes and places all throughout the world. And tribes doesn't just mean like indigenous people on, third world islands. But you go into a community and you have the sense of, these are my people. I will treat them with respect. You can see this if you go to a high school football game, right? You all can look the same except for the colors you're wearing. And how people can be so mean to each other because they're not your group. I will treat the people who are my people one way, and I'll treat the people who aren't my people another way. And that really reveals the way with which we view humanity. We can be good to our own, but hate, exclude, and exploit those that we think don't belong to us, whatever your standards might be. It's clearly going on here. Well, we don't want to attack our neighbors, but these guys, they're not of us. Have at them. They are here for our enjoyment. They are here for our exploitation. They are not viewed as people created in the image of God. And so there's a lot going on here. There's immorality, there's perversion, there's violence. Each action sinful before God on its own. It seems a lot like the world before Noah as we're considering these things. Remember when God looked at the world before the flood? And the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Or down further, it says, the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. Well, Sodom as a city is become a very wicked place. And it says, so Lot went out to them through the doorway. Here's a crowd saying, give us these visitors, that we may take hold of them and do to them what we please. And he tries to reason with them. These are my guests. You don't get to harm my guests. He says in verse 7, please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, that you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason that they have come under the shadow of my roof. So Lot tries to protect his guests. He knows this is a great evil. And we wonder at his solution here. Well, let's just say, this is not a good plan. But in his mind, it seems to be a lesser evil. There are some commentators who say that maybe by doing this, he will appeal to them because they will treat their own better. That he's actually trying to do some psychological, hey, they won't hurt my daughters because we're part of the community. I'm going to show you how serious. We don't know his thinking. It's a bad plan. Let's just leave it at that. Because we have a lot further to go this morning. But then they shouted, stand back. Then they said, this one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. And so they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men, that is the angels, reached out with their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. You know, sometimes in society, and the church should be a conscience in society. Sometimes, though, we're like Jiminy Cricket, and Pinocchio gets really tired of listening. And it's like, away with you. And at this point, they don't want to hear it from Lot anymore. And they have now let him know that, yeah, we let you live among us, and yes, some of your daughters have married among us, but you're not one of us. You don't get to judge us. Things should be becoming obvious to him that he is in the city, but he's not of the city. Well, then the angels step in. The angels have never been in any danger. They're now going to protect the man who thought he was protecting them. We read here in verse 11. It says, and they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. So the men are trying to break in, and the angels step out and be like, okay, be blind. Enough. We're tired of this. So all the men are blind. They're groping around. They can't find the door. They can't get in. And the threat is over. But I should say the immediate threat is over. The threat to the city is coming. Judgment has arrived. Because we see at this point, they let Lot know why they are there. And they speak in verse 12 saying, it says, the 2 men said to Lot, whom else have you here? A son-in-law and your sons and daughters and whomever you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place. Because their outcry has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters and said, up out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But he appeared to his sons-in-law to be jesting. It's a sad state. They now tell Lot, the city is about to be destroyed. This is not down the road. This is not eventually. This is not, if you don't do this, this is my 3rd warning. I'm going to count to 5. You have till 5. You remember those parents? 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5, 4 3/4, 5, right? No, judgment is coming now. Judgment is coming. If you have anyone in the city that is important to you, get them out. Depending on the version, it says his sons-in-law, and there's been some speculation there, a little bit of translational guessing. Are they talking about those who were pledged to marry his daughters, or did he have other daughters that had already intermarried into the culture of Sodom? We're not 100% certain. But he goes out and he talks to these people with which he has relationships in the city at this hour of night. Even after all the violence in the recent flare-up at his house, he goes out and he finds him. And he says, the city's about to be destroyed. Come out with me. But they won't listen to him. They're like, go to bed. You're joking. We don't have time for you. Go away. The angels asked him, who else do you have here? One of the commentators says, this is not so much for the angels' information as it is for Lot. Remember I said that Lot should not belong here, and indeed he does not? He's going to find out he has no real ties here. The people he thought were his friends, the place he has invested his time, the place he has invested his resources, it's not his to keep. They're not his people. And when he comes back alone. And it says, when the morning had dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. And while he lingered, you could circle that word in your mind. We're going to come back to that. The men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside of the city. So it came to pass when they had brought them outside that he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. It's a curious statement. So they say the city's about to be destroyed. He's almost been attacked by his neighbors. There's a miracle that makes everyone blind. It's obvious that they are divinely sent by this point. And he says, it's time to go. But what does Lot do? It's like he says, hold on a second. I got to put on a pot of coffee and absorb what you just said. So the city's about to be destroyed. It's time to go. Some of you have been in evacuation situations before. In our family, we used to live in Southern California. We got those really nice seasonal wildfires that just wiped out entire communities. And when Lori and I were a lot younger in our marriage and Garrett was still in the car seat, we get the call, it's time to leave town. It's time to leave town. And you could look up on the hillside outside town, you could see the flames slowly coming down the hill towards town. And we're like, yeah, it's time to go. And so we packed everything that we could into our car, financial records, photo albums, our pets, our child, our computer, not in that order. And we left. And you know what's really amazing? At that moment, nothing else mattered. And we're like, it's time to go. Lot's having a different response than we did here. Lot is sitting there like, what do I do? The angels are saying, it's time to go. Now would be a nice time to leave the city. And they have to drag him by the arms outside the city walls and say, run towards the mountains. There's something going on here, which we'll come back to again. Well, then Lot says, please know, my lords, indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have not increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See, now this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one, and my soul shall live? And he said to them, see, I have favored you concerning this thing also, in that I will not overthrow the city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the city was called Zor. So what happens? He looks up at the mountains. He's delayed a long time, says, I don't know that I can make it. He's not moving very fast anyway. He is overwhelmed by all of this information. And there's a city called Zor, a little village probably, and says, could you let us run there? It's not as far, it's safe. We have some place to be, not just in the mountains. He's afraid and he's not thinking clearly. And they say, okay, that city will not be destroyed. You can go there. We will not only show the mercy on you, but because of your behalf, the mercy will be extended to that city, and you will be safe there. And then they go. As we look through this, a lot of the things that he said to this point, they have given him several emphatic statements. Dr. Utley has said some things. They said, escape for your life. This is not casual conversation. They said, you need to run. They say, don't look back. And we note here, especially as we go forward with the tragedy in verse 26, which we haven't got to, this was very hard for Lot and his family to let go of their lives. Who they were was intertwined with what they were leaving behind. It says, do not stay anywhere in this valley. Escape to the mountains. And anywhere in the valley literally is meaning of the 5 cities which were going to be destroyed, the 5 major cities in the Jordan plain: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zor, which was also called Bela, which is now going to be spared. And we see here the uncertainty of Lot's personality. We don't know why he was afraid of the mountains, unless it was just a distance, but it reveals a lack of trust in God's provision. And then we read in verse 23, the sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zor. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Now, I'll say this. I want to give you the exact words of the commentary here. Readers are not exactly sure what happened here. Like, thanks. I was really trying to tell you guys. And when he says Lot's wife became a pillar of salt, I wanted to give you some really good exegetical analysis. And they go like, yeah, we're not exactly sure. Was she wandering back to the city when they says she looked back? Was she not running out of the mountains? Did she not go to Zor? Could she not handle it? Whatever the case is she is swept up in the judgment that hits those cities as well. It's a tragedy. I wanted to look at this really quickly, just as a parenthesis, because I do think it's interesting. All over the news in the last couple of years, the one site, if it is the north end of the valley, so take it with a giant parenthesis and a question mark. Could this be the place? Question mark, not period. They say there was a giant blast which absolutely leveled the civilizations at the north end of the Dead Sea in the Middle Bronze Age. Peter Eddington writes, he says, our editorial staff have been following these excavation efforts for the last 16 years, often visiting the site shortly after excavation started in 2005. We should note that we do have some dating issues with the site, as our understanding of the chronology of the time in which Abraham lived and Sodom was destroyed places a destruction off by about 200 years, which is different from which the excavators have concluded. And so they know this place was, ballpark, great figures, very, very close to the time of Lot. The people on the ground say, no, we think it matches the time of Lot. Forbes magazine said 3,600 years ago, the city of Tel El Hammam was a bustling metropolis with a population of about 8,000 people, the largest city in the region. But that suddenly came to an end. The researchers of the study looked at several things that could account for the destruction. Warfare seemed unlikely, as there were no other archaeological evidence of spear points or other weapons. Tornadoes are rare in the area, and it would be difficult to imagine how a tornado could cause the extent of damage seen in the human bones. Earthquakes could have led to fires, but could not explain the high temperature melting of the minerals. The authors looked at all sorts of natural disasters. They didn't look at, divine disasters, but from widespread city fires to volcanism to lightning, of the 17 types of observations they made, there was only one event that fit all the data, and that was a meteor. And I'm not saying it was or wasn't a meteor. God certainly could have used a meteor. God does use normal human means. That does not mean it's not providential. For it to hit its target on time is very much an act of divine judgment, if that's what God chose to do. But it says a meteor itself could have hit the city or nearby, and it could have exploded in the air like the Tunguska meteor in 1908 over Siberia. Either one could cause a level of destruction here. We could go on and on, but something happens here. This remarkably, and I'm jumping from sources here, just for quick time here. The biblical account of destruction from the sky turns out to be supported by numerous lines of geochemical and material evidence buried beneath the surface. It says something demolished the upper 40-some feet of the 4 to 5 story palace. It's just gone. The few skeletal remains showed fragmentation and extreme disarticulation, meaning the bodies had been violently ripped apart. They, having experiments, jumping down, says, indicate temperatures must have instantly exceeded 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit, 2,000 degrees Celsius, instantly. It's like an atomic bomb went off. How hot is that? Hot enough to turn a truck into a molten pool of iron. It says that we discovered human bones had been splattered by molten glass from the event. The glass is indistinguishable from that found at ground zero on an atomic explosion. We could go on. The puzzle is why the city was abandoned for several centuries. It could be that the salt inundated the lands, or the minerals from the explosion. It absolutely irradiated, that's not really the right word, absolutely sterilized the soil for some 600 years. And so what was once a lush valley became sand. What happened there was violent and permanent. And when God said it would happen, it did. And Lot did well to flee. We read that Abraham went out early in the morning, to wrap up as far as we'll go in the chapter, to the place where he stood before the Lord. And then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land, which went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. Now, we're not going to read the few verses here of Lot and his daughters. We want to keep our PG-13 rating for the sermon and with children, and we do encourage you to read that. What is really sad is that from this point, at least in Scripture, Lot kind of fades into obscurity and ignominy. He's in a bad state, falls into depression and drunken stupors, and his daughter is trying to do what is culturally appropriate, have no sense of what is biblically right, trying to maintain their lineage. And it's just a sad, sordid tale of a man who the Bible calls righteous. And that's something I want to stick with us for a little bit this morning. It's what we read this morning. We read these verses. It says, and righteous Lot. Up to this point, you might say, I've seen nothing in Lot that seems righteous. But the Bible says it so. It declares him righteous. And not that he was only righteous positionally, but there was some personal righteousness to him. We saw the way that he tried to treat the visitors. He was willing to take actions even when it put his own life in jeopardy. So there is a degree of whom he was in which there is something that is commendable. And we see in the book of 2 Peter, it says, he was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked, tormented in his soul day to day. He had not grown jaded. He still knew this was wrong. It upset him. He never was okay with what he lived about and around him. And yet he did live about it. And so I want to say three things quickly. We'll move quickly because we're running out of time. I want to do one of those director's cuts like they do for movie because there's so much here. But one is that the Lord will judge sin and wickedness. This is not about Lot. This is about the whole chapter. He will judge this world, and everyone will stand before him in the next life, either clothed in the righteousness of Jesus Christ or left in their own sins to await the right penalty for their actions. We have a choice. Judgment or mercy. God's first and best word is mercy. And I pray that all would receive it. Peter says it this way, beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. The Lord is not slow concerning his promise, as some consider slowness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness? There is a heaven to gain and a hell to shun. And we need to remember both. Secondly, several thoughts about Lot. Well, I've said before, Lot doesn't seem particularly righteous in this chapter. The Bible says that he is. And yet something is lacking in his life that we need to take note of, lest we follow in his footsteps. First, he has a progression in his relationship with Sodom that you would say is unwise or even sinful. Remember the progression? When he and Abraham first parted, he looked towards the cities of the plain, and he saw economic opportunity but did not consider the spiritual risks. He is a man who seems evidenced by eyes of sight and not eyes of faith, and living by sight, whose treasures are in this world and not the next, who is not storing up treasures in heaven, who wants to live a godly life but has no thought about the life that is to come. And so we see at first he goes towards Sodom, into the plains. And then in the next chapter, he lives near Sodom. And by the time we get to chapter 19, he is in Sodom and at the city gates. And his daughters are already intermarrying with the people of that evil, wicked city. He's made small compromises. We don't usually change our lifestyle for righteousness to wickedness in one big jump. It's usually a small amount of steps, one at a time, without realizing how far we've wandered. And he was offered, we don't know how come he was so well received. Well, he obviously had some money. Maybe because he had means, they wanted to welcome him in. You know, sometimes rich people get a pass that other people don't get. Maybe that's the case. Maybe when Abraham rescued the people of Sodom, it gave him some credibility, some status. Like, oh, your uncle rescued us. So you're okay. We don't know. Maybe it's because he did promise to have his daughters married to somebody who was significant within the city. And he was offered a seat at the table, but instead of asking whether he should take that seat, he seems to have just accepted the invitation. And we have to be careful with our associations. Lot made close associates of evil men, and he suffered greatly because of it. There's a reason the Bible says don't be unequally yoked. Of course, we're supposed to be in the world, and we're supposed to preach the gospel to everyone, and we're to show love for even the most foul of sinners. But the people that we allow to influence us and surround ourselves in and to impact us, we have to be very wary of these things. We're called to live in the world, but not to be like the world. And by Lot blurring those lines, even while Lot is called righteous, consider his impact. Everyone in his household has become corrupted. His sons-in-law, whatever other daughters or relatives he may have had, his laborers, all those who went into Sodom with him, save the two daughters who ran out with him, every other one of them is swept up and not labeled as among the righteous. He may have kept his personal righteousness, but he lost his family. He may have kept his personal righteousness, but he had no influence. For when he left that city, not one other soul came with him. No one said, by the basis of your testimony, I know that you are serious, I will go. It's a sad tale. You know, we see this thought, which I said to circle, Lot lingered. What does that even mean? Well, there's a book I read a long time ago, and I'm going to quote it here as we wrap up. It's a book called Holiness by J.C. Ryle. J.C. Ryle is a preacher about 150 years ago in England. And I was a very young youth pastor trying to figure out, what's the next subject I should do? So I'm just flipping through old books. And I started reading this. I'm like, well, this will preach. So we're just going to let him preach a little bit to you in just a minute, by means of me reading some of his words. But he said, and he lingered. And as I thought about that and considered his words in the text, it says Lot was not wholehearted. He knew God, but his affection seemed shallow. His treasures were not in the heavens, but on earth. And when that moment of judgment arrived, when he was called to leave behind temporary things, we see that he's undone by both the futility of his choices and the weight of his time and opportunities wasted. He has to leave behind everything because it's all he had. J.C. Ryle says it this way. There are many real children of God who appear to know far more than they live up to and see far more than they practice. And they continue in this state for many years. It's wonderful that they go so far, but they go no further. They hold the head, even Christ, and they love the truth. They like sound preaching, and they assent to every article of gospel doctrine when they hear it. But there's an indescribable something that is not satisfactory about them. They're constantly doing things which disappoint the expectations of their ministers and more advanced Christian friends. Marvelous that they should think as they do and stand still. They believe in heaven, yet seem faintly to long for it, and in hell, but they don't seem to fear it. They hate the devil, but they appear to tempt him to come. They know the time is short, but they live as if it were long. They know they have a battle to fight, yet a man might think they were at peace. They know they have a race to run, but they often look like people sitting still. They know that the judge is at the door and there's a wrath to come, yet they appear to be half asleep. Astonishing that they should be what they are and nothing more. They're afraid of being illiberal and narrow-minded and are always flying in opposite extremes. They would please everybody, suit everybody, and be agreeable to everybody, but they forget that they first ought to be sure that they please God. They are those who dread sacrifices and shrink from self-denial. They never appear to apply our Lord's command to take up the cross. And we know we live in a culture which wants to say, you're okay and I'm okay and we're okay where we are. But I don't want us to end up like Lot. Because when we read his story, and I thank God all our stories aren't written here, but we look at it and we know something's wrong. This is not the conduct of somebody who should love God, somebody who was declared righteous and who God cared so much about that he sent his angels to pull him from the flames. But at the end of the day, that is what we see. Lot was saved. I can't speak beyond the revelation of Scripture, but he reminds me of the individual in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. The one who was saved is only as if through the flames. And I hope, though, that we would live differently. We want to be as of those who would be content for getting our souls across the threshold of heaven, escaping the fires of judgment. I hope we would long for something better, something more important, something lasting, that we would invest our treasures in eternal things, that we would set our heart's affection on God and his purposes, that we would invest in things that truly last, and that we would live to please our Savior. Because Lot's life, at the end of the day, I believe it's a warning, and I hope we heed it, and I hope we purpose in our lives that we would do and be about our Savior's business, that we would lay up our treasures in heaven. I was going to close in prayer. I'm a little long, so we'll just skip the last song, let people have a little time for the coffee, cookies down in the gymnasium, or to make your way to a Sunday school class if you're doing that. Thanks for letting me go a little long. I could have gone a lot longer, just so you know. So let's pray.